Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa, Padurika Charja Ashtotar, the Sri Srimad Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa, Padurika Charja Ashtotar, the Sri Srimad Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. And those assembled devotees include those who are coming through the internet. So today, the title of today's discourse, to meet the requirements of YouTube, the qualities of pure devotees, part 2. Don't trouble anyone, and don't let anyone trouble you. That's, you'll see when we read the first verse. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On the 16th day of June 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We're in chapter 12, entitled Devotional Service. Text 15 on the bottom of page 523. Yasman nodvijate loko lokan nodvijate Chayah. Yasman no dvijate loko lokan no dvijate chayah. Harshamarsha Vayodvegar Muktoya Sachame Priyaha. Harshamarsha Vayodvegar Muktoya Sachame Priyaha. Yasman no dvitate loko lokan no dvitate chayah. Harshamarsha Vayodvegar Muktoya Sachame Priyaha. Yasmanno Dvitate Loko Lokano Dvitate Chayaha Harshamasha Bhayoddvegair Mukto Yasachame Priyaha. Yasmanno Dvitate Loko Kano Vijite Chayaha Harshamasha Bhayoddvegair Mukto Yasachame Priyaha. Yasmanno Jitate Loko Yasmanno Vijite Chayaha Harshamasha Bhayoddvegair Mukto Yasachame Priyaha. Yasmanno Dvitate Loko Lokano Dvitate Chayaha Harshamasha Bhayoddvegair Mukto Yasachame Priyaha. Yasmanno Dvitate Loko Lokano Dvitate Chayaha Harshamasha Bhayoddvegair Mukto Yasachame Priyaha. Yasmanno Jitate Loko Lokano Jitate Chayaha Harshamasha Bhayoddvegair Mukto Yasachame Priyaha. Yasmat, from whom, na, never, udvijate, are agitated. Lokaha, people, lokat, from people, na, never, udvitate, is disturbed. Cha, also, yaha, anyone who, harsha, from happiness, amarsha, distress, bhaya, fear, udvegai, and anxiety, muktaha, freed. Yaha, who, saha, anyone, cha, also, may, to me, priyaha, very dear. Translation. He by whom no one is put into difficulty, and who is not disturbed by anyone, who is equipoised in happiness and distress, fear and anxiety, is very dear to me. Purport. A few of a devotee's qualifications are further being described. No one is put into difficulty, anxiety, fearfulness, or dissatisfaction by such a devotee. Since a devotee is kind to everyone, he does not act in such a way as to put others into anxiety. At the same time, if others try to put a devotee into anxiety, he is not disturbed. It is by the grace of the Lord that he is so practiced that he is not disturbed by any outward disturbance. Actually, because a devotee is always engrossed in Krishna consciousness and engaged in devotional service, such material circumstances cannot move him. Generally, a materialistic person becomes very happy when there is something for his sense gratification and his body. But when he sees that others have something for their sense gratification and he hasn't, he is sorry and envious. When he is expecting some retaliation from an enemy, he is in a state of fear. And when he cannot successfully execute something, he becomes dejected. A devotee who is always transcendental to all these disturbances is very dear to Krishna. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, how does one get to the point where he never agitates anyone, is never agitated by anyone? Now, there's a certain caveat here, because as we'll read at the end of the whole Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says something like, this science should never be spoken to those who are not austere, who are not devotees, like that. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, more or less, that the devotees are kinder than Krishna, because Oftentimes they'll speak, he's in a Bhagavad Gita class or online. Who knows who's listening, And they may not be austere. They may not be devotees. They may be anything at all. But because it's necessary to get the message out, it's kind of an emergency situation in Kali Yuga. Therefore, we speak the Bhagavad Gita to all kinds of people. And also this idea of disturbing. Now, especially in the early days of the movement, where did I read this recently? Anyway, if you just look into the history of ISKCON, especially in America, the whole thing started with all these chanting parties went out. And some people were disturbed. Actually, in the very beginning, when Prabhupada would have lectures in his room, 26 Second Avenue, there were, of course, the evening classes, which were attended by all kinds of people, some for the first time, like that. But there were also morning classes. The morning classes, I think, mostly were in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila. There's only a handful there, the internal devotees, maybe a half dozen at most, 7, 8. And so Prabhupada found out very quickly if he has a kirtan there, it's early in the morning, 7 o'clock. So people upstairs, they're very upset. They're woken up. They would sometimes pour water on the floor and drip down, like that. So even hear Prabhupada say, but, be very, very quiet, kirtan, you disturb the people. But when it comes to especially book distribution or even Harinam, then Prabhupada says it's our duty to disturb them. It's just like someone who's in a mad condition and may hurt themselves, So you may have to restrain them for their own good. And they don't like it, they're very disturbed, but it's necessary. And so devotees, especially following in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we have to confront the people with Krishna consciousness. Sometimes they're not so happy about it because it's for their own good. It's kind of it's almost like a medical situation. So this idea of not disturbing anyone, of course, that's kind of a default. Just like not the idea of nonviolence. Now, you listen to Prabhupada's lectures, he talks about how I think it was Gandhi who tried to give an interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita that the final lesson is nonviolence. But that's ridiculous. It's on the battlefield, and the final result is Arjuna surrenders and he fights. He's wanting to be nonviolent, but in this specific situation, violence is necessary. You can't outlaw violence in this world. So that's but the default for a devotee is to be nonviolent. That's one of the principles in, I think, the 13th chapter. There's a whole list, or I forget, maybe the 16th chapter. We try not to hurt any living entity. Even the ants, the famous, how the hunter became a devotee. Everyone knows the hunter story. Maybe some of you new guys haven't heard it. So Narada Muni, he's he was cursed. He can't stay anywhere for very long, So he's always traveling, with his Vina and chanting and preaching and then going off. So he came into a forest one day, I forget where it was, in India, and he suddenly saw there's this half-killed animal writhing in the forest floor, and a few steps later there's another one. There's little rabbits and things like that. And it was pain, a devotee, any devotee would be, what is going on here? So finally he comes, he sees the hunter. There's a hunter who has done this, and the hunter, of course, he's pious, so he offers, I don't know if he offers a basin, I think he offers a basin to Narada Muni, and he says, oh, would you like something, oh, great sage, I can give you a deer skin or something, I said, no, I don't want any deer skins, But are you the one who's responsible for, these half-killed animals? He says, yes, I was trained by my father this way. It's a tradition in our Gotra, whatever. So my only request is that, okay, you're going to be a hunter. Just kill the animals outright, rather than leave them writhing in agony, and pick them up later and keep them fresher or whatever. I don't know what the reason is, So at first he was reluctant to do that because this is his tradition, So I think Narada Muni, he showed him that those animals that you killed, they're waiting for you after death. In other words, he gave him just the right preaching that he needed to get him serious, So he was worried about that. They're waiting to take their revenge, I think Narada Muni showed that to Prachanabarisha. Prachanabarisha. Didn't he show them that? Because he's also doing all these sacrifices. It's a very strong preaching technique. We should try to master that one. Anyway, so this hunter, who was what was his name? Oh,
Mrigari.
Mrigari. Thank you, Vijay. Mriga means animal, deers and other animal, and Ari means enemy. So devotees have changed his name to Mrigari. You ask any devotee what's his name. Oh yeah, Mrigari. No, Mrigari. There's no R in there. Anyway, just a note. So Mrigari, he wanted to know from the great sage, well, how can I be freed from this karma? So he says, I can help you with that. But first you have to have faith in me. You have to break your bow, and that's a serious thing because he's going to have to give up his livelihood, So he thought, and he broke his bow. So Narada Muni said, because he was worried about his livelihood, said, don't worry. You just break your bow and you follow my instructions and I'll provide everything. So the upshot is he became a great devotee. He says, you sell everything and you just live in this little hut here and you just chant Hare Krishna, I'll send everything you need. So he started chanting and, he changed. His heart changed completely. And he became a full-on devotee. So sometime later, Narada Muni comes back with Parvat Muni, his friend. And he said, I want to show you one of my disciples here, how he underwent a great change. He used to be a hunter. So from a distance, Mrigari, the form saw his Gurudev coming, and he was waving his chadar, and bowing down. But he was kind of this way, taking the chadar and going this way and that way on the path. And when he finally came to Parvat Muni and Narada, Parvat wanted to know, what were you doing with all that? He said, well, I didn't want to hurt any of the ants, They were on the path, so I squished them away so that then when I offered obeisances. So from being a cold-hearted hunter who's half killing animals, he turned out he didn't want to hurt an ant. And that's really what a devotee is. Because you understand, every one of these creatures, is a conscious living being, is a soul, just like me. But due to their karma, they're in this body, and I don't have any right to abbreviate their lives or stop, their progressive march, and cause them any pain. So you try to avoid any kind of suffering. But at the same time, when Krishna arranges for a battle, dharma, then is another thing. Then you do your duty and so on. So in this age, it's necessary to aggravate people a little bit, about with Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, they're just marching off to hellish, life. So for their very own good, you'll interrupt them in the airport or something like that, Now, within that understanding, we now understand that the best thing to do is to leave everyone with a good impression. Because that, even if they don't take a book, because they'll speak to somebody or they won't start a campaign against the Hare Krishnas. That also happened because devotees in the 70s were trying to maximize as much Lakshmi as they could bring out in books. So they were really becoming very aggressive out there. That's not necessary. On the strength, the mantra was then became on the merit of the books, to distribute on the merit of the books, rather with some flim flam. So anyway, I thought I'd share some of that in this regard. But here, the basic point here is that one tries not to aggravate anybody, and the natural mood of a devotee is very peaceful and very joyful, and it doesn't depend on having a certain emolument or situation in life or something. The joy is actually coming from within. And so you can be very happy with very little externals. We see the great examples of course, Srila Prabhupada, all of our acharyas, but especially the 6 Goswamis. They had as little as you could possibly have to live. They had no place to live. They were living under a different tree each night. Their clothes were picked up off the ground, rejected clothes, minimal wardrobe. And as far as eating goes, they would beg here and there and just take what they wanted. Sometimes they wouldn't eat. Sometimes they wouldn't sleep. They would be, But what was their actual state? They were in bliss all the time. Gopi bhava rasama tabda lahari kalolam bhagno mahur. They were constantly diving and drinking the ocean of the nectar of the Gopi bhava, the highest realm of pleasure. So when you have that kind of access to ananda and bliss, then you can be, very, very tolerant and of everything. And so one thought that came up while I was reading this is that how to remain undisturbed in equipoise in happiness, distress, fear, and anxiety. So in the third canto, chapter 25, beginning with text 20, there are 8 verses describing the nature of a sadhu. Several of these verses are often quoted by Srila Prabhupada. And Lord Kapila Dev, he describes the basic qualities of the devotee, of the sadhu, which are very parallel to these. He starts out, Titikshava, Karunika, Suridaksava Dehinam, Ajata Shatravat, Shanta, Sadhavak Sadhabhushana. These are like ornaments. These qualities like ornaments of the sadhu. Bhushana means ornament. So the first one is very tolerant, and then the next one is very merciful. It's easy to be very tolerant when you seclude yourself. You go off, into a secluded place. But if you're trying to be merciful, compassionate to the fallen souls by giving them Krishna consciousness, then you have to be tolerant, because you're going to get so much flack, and all kinds of things will happen. Just like Prabhupada, just to come to America, he had to be so tolerant. What to speak of when he got here, I mean, New York City, just to live in New York City, you have to be tolerant, whether you're a sadhu or not. It's not very conducive to human life. But because you're moved by this compassion for the fallen souls, you undertake all these austerities. So Titikshava Karana, Suridak Sarvadehin, the friend of all living entities. You can see how it's very parallel to this. In other words, you have no enmity toward any of them. You realize they're in these bodies for a certain amount of time, and then let me give the cat little beside him. We had a cat here for years, and he became totally addicted. You remember, he's been here longer than me. To kheer. I put a little kheer down on a leaf, I mean, cats love milk, right? They getting that kheer, and we'd come and expect the kheer. You say, oh, here is. They gave him a name. I think they gave him the name Narada Muni. I said, wait a minute, he's a cat. You can't get him Narada Muni, but that stuck. So he came, and this very nice orange complexion, Years, it seemed like years he would come back. So, the very fortunate cat, I remember once, this is another one, this back, where these condominiums are now, this was all like an open field, and in the front there was like a little bungalow up there, We had devotees living there at some time. So at a certain point, the devotees moved out, and some other people were living in it, and they had this big dog, So I'm starting to take prasadam. I used to take prasadam out here, and this big, huge dog comes bounding up, into the patio, and coming at me, I mean, he didn't look like he was going to bite me or anything, but he looked like he wanted some prasadam, So I gave him some prasadam, and there was no way to tell where, who he was. I mean, there was no collar on him or anything. So we filled him up with prasadam, so he was satisfied. And eventually we saw him wander back there, we say it like that. But it happens like that. There's all kinds of living entities. So in this Sadhu Sangashtaka, these 8 verses about a sadhu, it describes kind to all, very peaceful. And then he gets to the point, it's all about hearing, And he says, what do the sadhus do? How do they become sadhus? Mayananyena bhavina bhaktim kurvanti yedridham. Very determined, one-pointed, pure devotion to me. This is what makes them sadhus. Then, for my sake, they'll give up any activity they're doing, and they'll even leave their dear ones, if they're impediments. And then he comes to the verse that's very relevant here. Marashriya kata mrishta shunvanti katayanti cha tapanti vivadastapa naitan mudgata chetasa. So, Marashriya, those who've taken shelter of me, kata mrishta. Kata mrishta means very sweet and delightful vibrations about me. Krishna kata, Krishna katamrita, right? What do? Hear and chant. Shinvanti katayanti cha. And by doing that, tapanti vivadastapa, the miseries, the tapas, don't inflict, hurt them so much. They don't feel that much. Tapanti vivadastapa, naitamakata chetasa, because their minds are absorbed in me. So that absorption of the mind is everything. In the delightful vibrations about Krishna, remembrance about Krishna, then you can tolerate, you can withdraw the mind from the body, and Krishna takes over. He protects, like supernaturally, like with Prahlad. How could he tolerate all that? Because his mind was completely absorbed in Krishna. He's famous for that, for remembrance, complete absorption. So this is what a devotee does, is that he works with chanting and hearing and meditating and serving, so that the mind becomes completely absorbed in Krishna. And then it becomes, if you're drinking that nectar at all times, it's easy to tolerate, the pains. And how do you tolerate the pleasures? That's always here, harsha mash. The allurements, they have no allurement. Just like Haridas Thakur. He showed both poles, right? The famous story how he was arrested, and they wanted to execute him. He was born into a Muslim family, but he became, I don't know the history of how he took up the chanting, but he became the Namacharya. So much so that every morning, whenever we say the Prema Dhwani, then he's in there. So he would chant 300,000 names a day, which is 192 rounds. You can imagine. That's how much more than 12 times more than we do. That's 12 times 16. So anyway, he would chant all day, and on the negative side, so there was there was a lot of Muslim rulers there. So they arrested him because he was becoming very famous, and even the other Muslims liked him. Very sweet, and so they saw him as a seditious element that he was. So they arrested him and said, "Well, I don't know what it is, but there's a certain part of the Quran that you recite, and it declares your faithfulness as a Muslim." I forget what it's called. So they said, well, you can recite that now and come back into the fold of Muslim, or basically we're going to execute you. So he's famous. There's a famous verse in the Chaitanya Bhagavat. I don't know if he laughed or not. I think he did. But he said, you can cut me up into little pieces, but I'll never stop chanting Hare Krishna. Very famous. So they said, okay, that's it. It was the sheriff, the Qazi. I don't know if it was the same Qazi. I think it was a different Qazi. But so they said, okay, execute him, as an example. And they had this system of executing where they beat you to death in the bazaar, in the public place where people would get the message. Okay. And so they took him to the first bazaar, and they beating him, and he's just chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. And he's not feeling anything, just like Prahlad. In fact, isn't he an incarnation of Prahlad? I think Prahlad and Brahma also. So then they went to the next bazaar, the next 22. And finally, the executioners were panic-stricken because he wasn't dying. And they told him, and Haridas picked up on it and said, what's the matter? And he says, well, if you don't die, then he's going to execute us. So talked about Harsha Masha Bayodvega. So Haridas did not want to disturb them, and cause any pain. So he said, I'll die. But of course he didn't die. He went into samadhi, which looks like death. They didn't know the difference. So they carried the supposedly dead body back to the Qazi. He said, here, should we bury him? No. If you bury him, this will become a place of pilgrimage. Throw him in the river. Ganges, I think it was Ganges. So they threw him in the river, came out of samadhi, swam across, and started chanting, And they had told him, if you survive this, we won't bother you anymore. So that's how, in our little way, if we become absorbed in Krishna consciousness, we'll be able to become more and more tolerant of both the allurements and the sufferings that may come. So that's a little meditation on this verse. And then the other one is, the rest of it is Harsha Masha Bayodvega Mukta. 1 second, Vijay. So there's these other dualities, Harsha and Amarsha. What is Harsha and Amarsha? Happiness, distress, fear, and anxiety, being freed from all of those. Harsha is material happiness, material, jubilation. So you're freed. This is the definition of equipoise, which used to be equipoise. If you look at all of the old books, you'll see equiposed. They didn't know what the word was. equipoised, means this satisfaction and serenity in the face of so many dualities of this world. Vijay, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Dravida Prabhu. May I?
Please.
The quote is as follows. Quote, from the purport, when he's expecting some retaliation from an enemy, he is in a state of fear. And when he cannot successfully execute something, he becomes dejected. End quote. So, Prabhu, in your country, in the 30s, there was the economic depression, and because of losing their wealth, the rich people were jumping from tall buildings in order to commit suicide.
You're talking about the Great Depression back in the 20s?
Yes.
Yeah, the stockbrokers, the guys who were speculating on the stock market, is famous that some of them jumped out the window because they lost everything suddenly. Yeah.
So this is related to becoming dejected.
Yes. This is
okay,
the materialist. Yeah.
So my question is it that in the context of this quote, for me to never have to jump from a tall building in order to commit suicide, just because of economic dejection, if I may say so, is it that I should never be there accumulating wealth?
Well,
that is the solution for the problem?
Well, there's a little more to it than that from the devotee perspective, because we can accumulate wealth for Krishna. In other words, if you may have a business and you're making so much money, but the plan is, okay, I'll make this money and I'll give it to the temple, or I'll build the temple, like that. So that's fine, but notice that the motive is different. If the motive is to serve Krishna, then if it doesn't work out, you were already successful just by the effort. If it's your own egotistical thing of accumulating money so I can be richer than anyone else and buy all this sense gratification. Now the thing is yachts. Have you know that? Yachts, the billionaires. They have yachts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It's crazy, So you can imagine if the yacht sinks, how dejected they'll be, right? I just spent $200 million on my yacht. So the difference is everything is the whole difference is in the motive. The devotees. That's why Prabhupada says it looks like devotees are doing the same thing, as the karmis. Just like in the early days, some devotees would have to work. Like Jayananda, he would work as a taxi driver, and he would work overtime for more money. And people who didn't know, they think, oh yeah, this guy's trying to pay his rent, so he's but he's actually paying the rent in the temple. So it's devotional service. It's sacrifice. He's becoming purified by that. And if for some reason his car breaks down, well, he may be disappointed he can't make the money of that, but not for himself. In other words, it just like if you read Chaitanya Charitamrita or Chaitanya Leela, in general, there seems to be so much, pain and separation. And Sanatana Goswami wanted to commit suicide because he thought he was offending Lord Chaitanya. Of course, he was stopped from doing that, but that was a mistake. But the idea is that for a devotee, because it'll say here, Sarva Ramba Parityagi, that's the next one. He gives up, not striving for some result. Well, wait a minute. I thought we were striving for some result. We want to sweep the floor and it gets clean, and we strive for the result, or whatever. But the point is that it's all on our. If we do it on our own account, then that's Maya. And whether you succeed or fail in that result, you're still bound up. You're jubilant materially because you succeeded, or you're depressed and anxious because you failed. But both of those bind you, and there's karma in both. So, but the devotee, he may have, he may expect retaliation from an enemy, but he says, well, it's up to Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. You just become absorbed, and you realize we don't have any enemies in the sense that we don't have any enmity toward anyone. But people make enemies out of devotees. I mean, during the deprogramming days in the 70s and early 80s, I think it was, the parents of some of the devotees were furious that their children had been brainwashed to join the Hare Krishnas. So we were their enemies. It happened right here, across the street. You don't remember. The devotee just called me up. I forget his name. Forgive me if you're listening in. But he was interested. He came around, and he was a Jewish background. So I was taking breakfast with him outside, and he described the situation. Yeah, my mother doesn't like it, and my rabbi is not into it. He's really against me, seeing you guys. And I said, it sounds like the old deprogramming days. And I outlined to him what would happen, that they would invite him home, and they would kidnap him and take him away and try to break his faith and everything. And he was like astounded. Sure enough, a month or two later, I happened to be out of town. I used to travel a lot before the pandemic. And so I come back, and it was Sunday, and the Sunday feast, and everyone is abuzz. I said, what happened? And so they said, and he was standing here, right over here. I said, what happened? They tried to kidnap me. They tried to deprogram me, But he was alerted because he talked to me. And so the van was parked right up here on Cass. And so they invited him in there, and suddenly there were these two guys, But he was a tough guy, and he hit one and knocked him to the ground, and the other one he bit his finger or something, and he jumped out of the van and came back here. I think his mother was in the van too. And he said, oh my God. And they drove off. And he was saved. But so they saw us as an enemy and him as a victim, you see? But we said, they're just completely misguided. It's not that we started, we hate them. We hate them. How can we get back at these people, these deprogrammers? No, we just trusted in Krishna and prayed, and and it actually worked out eventually. It's another story. There was a trial in New York, and a big case where they actually succeeded in kidnapping one devotee, one lady, but she escaped and came back, and it was a big legal case. We were accusing them of kidnapping. And so the result probably was in India, and they sent I don't know if it was the New York Times, but it was a big decision. The judge said, he ruled in our favor. He said, this Hare Krishna is a bona fide religion. It goes back thousands of years. They had presented that, and this is a free country. The freedom of religion is a big deal, And so, any further things along this line, and it'll be kidnapping, so the kidnappers were just in it for the money. They all stopped, the deprogrammers. Okay, no more. We're not going to do it anymore, because they didn't care. So that Prabhupada, when he read that, he said, now my movement is successful, because the high court judge, a big judge, he had ruled that the Hare Krishna movement is a bona fide religion. So it's all a question of motive, and devotees may accumulate money. They may become violent if someone attacks the devotees, attacks the deities. That's happened and it's gone. But that's not karma. That's actually duty. That's the proper thing to do. There's a proper place for anger. There's a proper place for lust, even, to reproduce and have children in the movement. But it's all a question of why we're doing it and who we're doing it for. Is that okay, Vijay?
Dravida Prabhu, better than okay. Wonderful answer to my question. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Whenever I give class with you, you're there, I always have to defend against getting puffed up. So, thank you for that. Because you never say, that was kind of an okay answer, but but anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Do it.
All right, we're going on to text 16. Anapeksha shuchir daksha udasino gatavitaha sarvaramba parityagi yomad bhakta same priyaha. My devotee who is not dependent on the ordinary course of activities, who is pure, expert, without cares, free from all pains, and not striving for some result, is very dear to me. Purport. Money may be offered to a devotee, but he should not struggle to acquire it. If automatically, by the grace of the Supreme, money comes to him, he is not agitated. naturally a devotee takes a bath at least twice a day, so that he's going through one by one. Shuchi, now shuchi, pure. Naturally, a devotee takes a bath at least twice in a day and rises early in the morning for devotional service. Thus, he is naturally clean both inwardly and outwardly. Then daksha, a devotee is always expert because he fully knows the essence of all activities of life and he is convinced of the authoritative scriptures. Then, udasino, a devotee never takes the part of a particular party, therefore he is carefree. He is never pained because he is free from all designations. He knows that his body is a designation, so if there is some bodily pains, he is free. The pure devotee does not endeavor for anything which is against the principles of devotional service. It's the sarvarambha parityagi. For example, constructing a big building requires great energy, and a devotee does not take to such business if it does not benefit him by advancing his devotional service. He may construct a temple for the Lord, and for that he may take all kinds of anxiety, but he does not construct a big house for his personal relations. So, this book that came out, I'll Build You a Temple, is a perfect example of that. Prabhupada took so much anxiety for that, and devotees did also. And by doing so, they made great advancement. There's the Lord, Radha Rasa Bihari, and in a little temporary temple. And the guy who sold him the land, he had a scam going, where he'd done this before, where he gets the down payment, and then he said, well, I'm not selling it to you. Well, give me my down payment. No. And he had all kind of influence in the government, so people lost their down payments for the land. So he thought he would do the same for Prabhupada. So he approached Prabhupada to offer him the land. Yeah. And Prabhupada said, oh, yes. He saw this land earlier before he came to America. He thought he would be an easy mark. See, this is something that I realized some time ago, not too long ago, that Prabhupada was the obviously the perfect person to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, because coming to America and having to deal with all the shysters, they try to cheat him out of $10,000. Back in 26 Second Avenue, he had his eye on a certain building, and they had collected some money and they gave a down payment to this guy who was sweet talking them. He liked the Swami and all this stuff, and so. Prabhupada, he was traveling, and the innocent boys, were losing the money in New York. So he came back, and he got a lawyer, and he was, he knew the ins and outs of business. He had been a businessman, unlike many of his godbrothers who were, sadhus from birth. Anyway, Prabhupada was a sadhu, no question about it. But he had these skills that he could actually deal with all the complicated stuff in Bombay, and finally secure the land. And approach all wealthy people and pious, Vaishnavas. It's a great story. And of course, the book is out now. But anyway, so he's referring to that. He may construct a temple for the Lord, and for that may take on all kind of anxiety. And Prabhupada did that, with spades, not just in Bombay, but also in Vrindavan. There's also trouble with the land and all kinds of things. So again, the whole point is the motive. The devotee is neutral, he's not dependent on ordinary course of activities, and sarvarambha parityagi. So the pure devotee, the impetus for his action is always the Lord's desire, you see? And so in that sense, he's really not doing anything on his own account, and so there's no result, there's no good or bad reaction, what we call karmic reaction. It all simply merges into Brahman, or more specifically, it's part of his devotional service to Krishna. So that allows him to be, equipoised and not dependent on course of activities and things like that. So that's what we try to strive for, and that's what Krishna keeps saying. Such a devotee is very dear who is in that state, and being in that state is evidence of having done the work to get to the point of always remembering Krishna and being completely dependent on Krishna at every moment, And this is described in many places throughout the Bhagavatam, that kind of state. So that's what Krishna is describing here, how one can be dear to him. And that's, after all, what we're trying to strive for. I mean, it's a little paradoxical, because every living entity is dear to Krishna. But all the living entities who occupy the different parts of the material world, they've completely forgotten Krishna. They've completely forgotten Krishna. And they're in various states of manifestation up and down the different species. We know that. So they're all dear to Krishna, and he's with them as a super soul, guiding them. The lower species, well, how do they know what to do? The bird is born, comes out of the shell, and like 3 days later they know how to fly, How's that? Or, that's all coming from the super soul. It's what they call instinct, but it's really intelligence that's built in. And so how does that help? So you have to look on the long, time. This is another soul coming through the different species, gradually working off the karma and coming up to the human form. And in the human form, which is very rare and valuable, we can understand these higher things and not simply obey the impulses of the senses and the mind, but actually cultivate our intelligence, and through that intelligence control the lower self and undergo the purification where we can go back to Godhead. Right? So Krishna is making these arrangements, and he's with us in all of these other bodies, as a super soul, and in many human bodies, including the demons and everyone else. And he's, so why is that? Because he's our Father. What is that? Sarva yonisha konteya murtiyak sambhavandiya tasam brahma mahadhyoni aham bija padakta. You know that one? All right. One of the famous ones. Yeah. Okay. So, the beginning of the 14th chapter, Krishna says, I am the seed-giving father of every living entity, you see. So the father always has feeling, protective feeling and fatherly feeling for the living entities, for his praja, offspring. So we all belong to that, and Krishna is trying to help us to turn back to him and become purified so we can return back to God. So that's always there. So, but here it says, by doing all these things, one can is very dear to me. So there's two things going on. One is becoming dear to Krishna and feeling that on ourselves, and Krishna is becoming dear to us, and we're becoming dear to Krishna. So in other words, we're always dear, but it's like, a rascal son, or it's so incorrigible that you have to send him off to some camp or something where be practically military, so that he'll learn how to control himself or something. You know what I mean? The parents do it out of love because they're at their wits' end, pulling their hair out. You know what I mean? So this is the boot camp. We're in the boot camp. And it's sometimes very severe. But the parents are always ready to take us back when we become reformed, even a little reformed, and we can live in the temple, and we can experience the presence of God and become more and more, free from the influence of Maya, and be aware of how dear we are to Krishna, because Krishna is becoming dear to us. That's the idea. All right, we've got a little time. Let's go on. More verses about who is dear to Krishna. Yona rishyati nadveshti, nashochati nakankshati, shubhashabha parityagi, bhaktiman yasame priyaha. One who neither rejoices nor grieves, who neither laments nor desires, and who renounces both auspicious and inauspicious things, such a devotee is very dear to me. Sorry. Purport. A pure devotee is neither happy nor distressed over material gain and loss, nor is he very much anxious to get a son or disciple, nor is he distressed by not getting them. If he loses anything which is very dear to him, he does not lament. Similarly, if he does not get what he desires, he is not distressed. He is transcendental in the face of all kinds of auspicious, inauspicious, and sinful activities. He is prepared to accept all kinds of risks for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Nothing is an impediment in the discharge of his devotional service. Such a devotee is very dear to Krishna. So, I'm obviously not on this level. I already told the story of losing my iPad and my computer in the airport, right? Did I tell you that? You weren't here. I didn't tell you that story? Oh, it must have been in some other context. All right, so I'm on one of my many trips to Florida. I have a friend there, and I visit him twice a year in Alatra. I did that for 20 years before COVID, before COVID days. So this wasn't my very last trip. I think it was one or two trips back. And I take Southwest. It's very convenient. You seat anywhere you want, you know. It's cheaper. But anyway, this time, instead of flying to Atlanta, changing a plane and going to Jacksonville, which is a direct route, they took me all the way up to Baltimore, you know, which is, you know, on the East Coast. Then from there we fly down. So it was a longer trip than usual. So anyway, I'm reading my iPad, as I usually do. Reading. It's a 5-hour flight across the country. And, you know, I'm dozing a little, reading a little, dozing a little, reading. And there's a little compartment right in front of my next seats where you can kind of squeeze it in there, so it was very convenient. Anyway, so I doze off. So we're coming to Baltimore, and I saw it was raining a little bit. All right, we come in, you know, exit the train, exit the plane, come out, and I hadn't eaten. I can't eat on the planes. That's a long, you know, it's 5 hours. You know. All right, so I brought something with me, a few nuts and fruits, you know. So I set up in the airport, you know, we have an hour and a half wait over. And I, you know, take my, you know, prasadam, and then I said, uh-oh, where's my iPad? Oh no, I left my iPad on the plane. I left it on the plane in that little compartment. And suddenly I'm panicking. By that time I had finished my lunch, and I had set up with my computer. I was doing a little work. I had my earphones on, you know, sitting in one seat, you know, in the boarding area. So suddenly I thought, my iPad, I left it on the plane. Maybe the plane is still there. I said, oh, no, come on, it's been 45 minutes. These planes just stay there. Some of the people stay on the plane because they're going to Fort Lauderdale. I said, oh, of course it took off. Anyway, I'll try. I said, because of the rain, it was a delay, you know, so the plane was still there. So I jumped up from there. I put the computer down, and I ran off. And I found one guy finally. Can I go on the plane to get my iPad? No. But you can tell us where it is on the plane, and we'll try to find it for you. So, okay. But there's no seat numbers on Southwest. You know, you just go on and take any seat that's available. So I explained where it was, and I said, I'm waiting. As I'm waiting, you know, 5-10 minutes go by. Uh-oh, what happened to my computer? So I run back to where I was sitting. It's not there. And everybody who was waiting to get on the plane has already got on the plane, and there's one guy waiting for the next plane. So I said, did you see a laptop around here? He said, no. I said, oh no, now I've lost the laptop, and I've lost the iPad. My whole, you know, it was one thing to lose the iPad, that's bad enough, but the laptop has, you know, 30 years of work on it, you know. So that was my state of mind. So then, you know, I'm kind of shocked. He goes, Krishna, what did I do, you know? And so then I see the guy coming, and he's holding my laptop, my iPad. He found it on the plane. It was, you know, no one took it. It was on the same place. All right, that's good, but that's small comfort now that I've lost my laptop. So I finally found one lady who was in charge of all of the stations. The whole thing was one, you know, the Southwest. And I said, I lost a laptop. This is a description of it, you know, and maybe you could call around. See, okay. I wasn't very hopeful. So I'm kind of just lamenting, you know, and then finally. And she said, oh, Mr. Donor, look. And there's a guy, not only, someone had put it into the bag, you know, and he was carrying it. You have your laptop. I was almost ready to give him a hug, but I didn't. So now I had the laptop, and I had the iPad back, you know. I said, oh, thank you, Krishna, thank you. So I sat down. I still had some weight. So I'm sitting down. And I said, okay, I might as well try to do what I was doing. You know, I had the laptop securely in the bags and everything. So I'm typing away, and I said, what happened to that wire? You know, I had the earphones on, but there was a wire that goes to the you know, to the laptop. I said, that's gone. He said, who cares? It's $5, you know. So maybe when I jumped up, it you know, came off and ripped out of there and fell down on the ground. Maybe it's where I went across, and I saw it, and there, sure enough, underneath the seat I was sitting in, there was that little wire. So Krishna gave me back the whole thing. So that's just the opposite of how you're supposed to be, right? I didn't really, you know, no narishti, not dveshti. No, I was very much shochati and kakshati, you know. But after all, it was paraphernalia for service. So that's the story of that. But here, the shochati, kakshati, I mean, that's right out of the 18th chapter. Oh, okay, where Krishna said, Brahmabhuta prasanatman, the shochati and the kakshati. If you rise up to Brahmabhuta platform, you won't hanker for material things, and you won't lament when you lose them. And basic thing is prasanatma, you'll be very joyful all the time. So these qualities are, repeated in the Gita. Okay, so we got through 17. On Monday, we should be able to finish this chapter. And very concise, very important chapter. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.